In 1941, an American educator, Grigor Zimor, who had been the president of the American Colony School in Berlin, published a book about the Nazi educational system, which he had been allowed to study. Hitler's schools do their jobs diabolically well, he concluded. They are educating boys and girls for death. They are preparing them as a sacrifice for Hitler. The study of war and its prevention has typically focused on international security arrangements such as alliances or collective security. The idea is that confronted by a militarily superior force, the aggressors will back down and peace will be preserved. It makes sense, which is why it is so commonly accepted, but history shows that those who initiate wars are not so easily deterred. The Second World War illustrates the failure. Hitler was intent on war. If men wish to live, then they are forced to kill others, he proclaimed in 1929. One is either the hammer or the anvil. We confess it is our purpose to prepare the German people again for the role of the hammer. 10 years later, he fulfilled his prophecy. 2 years after that, while still at war with Britain, he attacked the Soviet Union. And while his armies were fully engaged on two fronts, he declared war on the United States after Pearl Harbor, even though he was under no obligation to do so. In making his case for the League of Nations, President Woodrow Wilson told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, quote, that the great tragedy through which we have passed never would have occurred if the Central Powers had dreamed that a number of nations would be combined against them, unquote. But Hitler's actions proved Wilson wrong, since Hitler willfully brought the Soviet Union and the United States into the war by initiating the conflicts with them. The same is true of Japan. Contrary to what one would expect from the top-down deterrence method of preventing war, the Japanese attacked us even though they knew we were militarily superior. I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months, but I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto told the Prime Minister of Japan in 1940, I hope at least that you'll make every effort to avoid war with America. Yamamoto's assessment was very likely affected by the time he spent in the United States. He had been assigned to the Japanese embassy in Washington and had also studied English at Harvard. At the very least, we can assume this gave him a more informed opinion of the military challenges of war with the United States. But it also raises the question of whether his time here affected his attitudes. Yamamoto's got no guts, one naval officer openly complained. He's too fond of England and America. Yamamoto ultimately obeyed his orders and commanded the attack on Pearl Harbor. But his conflicted situation raises an obvious question about another approach to peace building, one that is not top-down but rather bottom-up, focusing not on deterrence and balance of power, but on creating ties among peoples. To be sure, such approaches are not new. In a marvelous letter to Lafayette, George Washington hoped, quote, that nations are becoming more humanized in their policy, that the subjects of ambition and causes for hostility are daily diminishing, and in fine, that the period is not very remote when the benefits of a liberal and free commerce will, pretty generally, succeed to the devastations and horrors of war. Washington's sentiment was elaborated a century ago by Norman Angell in his book, The Great Illusion. Angell argued that financial interdependence had made war irrational. The complexity of modern finance makes New York dependent on London, London upon Paris, Paris upon Berlin, to a greater degree than has ever yet been the case in history. Angell argued that the consequence is that no one can have any interest in war. What is a further corollary of this situation, he asked. It is that Germany is today, in a larger sense than she ever was before, England's debtor, and that her industrial success is bound up with English financial security. Unfortunately, World War I broke out soon afterward. That war was preceded by an ugly conflict in the Balkans, and in a 1913 edition of his book, Angell clarified the illusion. It is not that the likelihood of war, it is not the likelihood of war which is the illusion, but its benefits, he explained. It is likely or unlikely according as the parties to a dispute are guided by wisdom or folly. Well, yes, but that's a little too easy. Wars are not only about interests, because human beings are emotional. Wars are not just about money, because human beings are motivated by other considerations. That is why, for example, our Declaration of Independence ends with the signatories pledging our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. In discussing British behavior at Munich, Winston Churchill spoke of the importance of honor. There is, however, one helpful guide, namely for a nation to keep its word and to act in accordance with its treaty obligations to allies. This guide is called honor. At the same time, he warned that honor can be abused. Honor is often influenced by that element of pride which plays so large a part in its inspiration. An exaggerated code of honor leading to the performance of utterly vain and unreasonable deeds could not be defended, however fine it might look. It is precisely that exaggerated sense of honor that prompted George Washington to advise the American people to avoid making alliances permanent. He was afraid that permanent alliances would lead to the creation of permanent antipathies, and the people would then be prone to inflame trivial incidents into insults on honor that had to be addressed. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable when accidental or trifling occasions of dispute occur, Washington explained. The nation, meaning the people, the nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. Thus, to address the problem of war, we need to supplement top-down with bottom-up approaches. We have to address not only interests of state, but emotions of people. Washington made a start with that by emphasizing the importance of ties of commerce, but as we have seen, that is not enough. The Yamamoto question, however, raises the possibility of whether educational exchanges can enhance commercial ties in helping to build peace from the bottom up. Put simply, if there had been thousands and thousands of people like Yamamoto who had studied in the United States and elsewhere, could Pearl Harbor have happened? One of the great blessings of the end of the Cold War has been the growth of such international exchanges. For someone like myself, who studied in the Soviet Union, but did not meet any Soviet students here, and I was an undergraduate at Georgetown when I first went to the Soviet Union. It is extraordinary to see all the foreign students on American campuses. And unlike Yamamoto, they're not simply studying English. Typically, their English is already good. Rather, they are here for more serious courses of study, which means they spend more time and mingle with other students from all over. The end of the Cold War also means something else. In those days, it was impossible to maintain any friendships formed. It was simply too dangerous. Now those barriers have largely fallen. In addition, new media have made it easier to stay in touch. Building peace also concerns the type of education being offered. Ziemer provides an example of the dangers of one type of education, quoting from a Nazi manual. The chief purpose of the school is to train human beings to realize that the state is more important than the individual, that individuals must be willing and ready to sacrifice themselves for nation and Führer. In contrast to this culture of obedience, American education, I think now, offers a culture of questioning. This is the spirit that is the foundation of scientific method and democracy. As Judge Learned Hand put it, the spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. It is in that spirit that we can hope to realize Washington's vision of a peaceful world, which he laid out in his letter to Lafayette, built from the bottom up in which we are all, quote, citizens of the great republic of humanity at large.